Buenos días.
So we are here with Bob Emiliani. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
We have some guests. I expect some others to connect as we go along. So if you wish, we can start. We have about an hour. So we will be speaking about this wonderful book, Principles of Mass and Flow Production from Frank Woollard.
Mhm.
And you will tell us a bit about your investigation and your analysis and conclusions regarding the topic. And
Absolutely.
so, great. Muchas gracias a todos por conectarse. And so let's kick it off.
Okay. I'll get right into it.
Yeah, but if
Um,
if if
yeah,
if I may,
sure,
I
sure.
I should introduce you, of course, and myself for the people who don't know me. I guess everybody knows you, not me, but Bob is investigator, teacher, coach, who has worked for many many years, who has written many many books regarding lean, and he has a lot of topics that could take us about a week or more, and we would never end speaking here together. But today, our topic is regarding this wonderful book. I'm repeating because there's a lot of people connecting. This
Mhm.
wonderful book, Principles of Mass and Flow Production. And Bob used to work in manufacturing. I believe this is Pratt and
Yep,
Whitney.
yep.
And then he was very fortunate to get direct coaching from Shingijutsu Kaizen and one of the great Ono disciples.
Mhm.
And afterwards, got into teaching for many, many years. And of course, I'm repeating this. He wrote many, many books. So, Bob, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And myself, I'm Alfredo Solarte. I am manager and owner for Excel Ideas, a consulting company here in Latin America. And so let's let's go along, Bob.
Okay, let's start. All right. So this research project has ideas that go back many, many years, and I recall in reading the book that A.G. Toyota wrote in the 1980s, how he was influenced by a book published in the UK called The Motor Industry, and that was a study of the British automotive industry in the 50s and 60s. And I had a difficult time finding this book because whenever I ran into a citation in a paper or a book, it was an incorrect citation. And so finally, one day I found the correct citation in a paper by Matthew Holweg in 2007. And what you see here is the original copy of the book called The Motor Industry. And it was written by George Maxey and Aubrey Silbertson. And I, in fact, met Aubrey Silbertson in one of my research trips, one of my trips to England to research Frank Woollard. And we met at the Oxford and Cambridge Club and talked about mass production and flow production and so on. He's an economist by trade. He passed away several years ago. Anyway, so I finally found that book, The Motor Industry, and in it they referenced Woolard's book, Principles of Mass and Flow Production, and that's an original copy of the Mass and Flow Production book, which we preserved in the reprint. Um, so anyway, so I was very excited to actually find the Motor Industry book and the Woolard book, and was quite amazed when I had read through them because I was completely unaware of Woolard and his work on flow production. And so part of the research project involved contacting people worldwide, really globally, to find out more information because Morris Motors, which was a UK automobile manufacturer starting out in the 1920s, they exported their cars, for example, to Australia and so forth. And I was on the hunt to find more information. So I contacted a lot of people to get information. A lot of it was dead ends. But I stumbled upon a guy by the name of Peter Seymour, who was a British automotive guy He was in that industry, and he was a historian of Morris Motors and so on. So we ended up collaborating, and it was a very important collaboration because it turns out British English is not the same as American English, and certain nuances and details are a little bit more difficult to understand if you're not a British English speaker. So I spent 2 years on this research project and made 2 trips to Birmingham area in the United Kingdom to research Woolard's archives in a library, as well as interview one of his proteges, David Bramley, who was 92 or 3 years old at the time. And of course, he passed away a short time later. So anyway, it was a really wonderful research project because I would do my research stuff during the day, and I'd email Peter Seymour at night, and he'd reply, and in the morning I would have emails from him about stuff that he found, and we spent a year and a half exchanging emails like that. It was a very exciting and interesting research project. So that's a little bit of a background about this. Um, so Alfredo, I know you have some questions. You want to run through questions that
Yeah,
you had? Yeah.
yeah, let's do that. Um, I was wondering if you're okay, and I'll start from the back, um, end to beginning, because to me it was such a discovery, and let me take this opportunity to thank you again, because I was really unaware of the existence of Frank Woollard, and of course, absolutely unaware of the existence of this concept of flow production, so developed before the Toyota system came to be known. And so this was a real shocker to me. And reading the book, and discovering that so much of what the TPS, which is really, really important, of course, and has had so much influence in the world, uh, almost had been written up to almost every aspect of it in such detail that was really shocking to me. So to
Mhm.
me, it's a big opportunity for people who are interested in flow production to get this awareness, uh, to read in detail, if I may suggest
Mhm.
this, and of course, ask questions as, for instance, the following: Why is it that, despite having such development in the aftermath of the second industrial revolution, because this was around the 1920s that
Mhm.
Wheeler was writing for the first time about flow production. Why is it that we are following the Toyota production system and not the Willard production system?
Yep. Um, the primary reason is because Woolard was prolific in his writing about flow production, but the locations of where his writings appeared were in journals related to machinery, material handling, and automation. So Woolard was the innovator of something called automatic transfer machines. And this became something that was much more popular in the manufacturing world shortly after World War II. And so he was way ahead of his time in designing and developing these machines in collaboration with a machine tool maker. And his work didn't appear in the more common places that you would expect it to appear, such as manufacturing or production type of journals or magazines. And so consequently, we didn't know about it. Now, Woolard was more of I would characterize him more as a mechanic of production, although he had a philosophical, you know, some philosophical thinking about, production and how you should do it and so on. Whereas Ono was more of a person of related to the philosophy of production and less the mechanic. So they pursued flow production from different directions.
Okay. I have a maybe it looks like the same question, but it isn't. It has a nuance, because now I get it. Maybe there's also circumstances and and being ahead of your time, perhaps, and stuff like that. But I understand why we're not talking about Willard as the father of flow production. Instead, we're talking about Ono, which has all the merit, of course. But the following question, and I'll leave it at that, would be why aren't we not talking about the Morris production system?
Well, let me back up a little bit. So first of all, Henry Ford and his collaborator Charles Sorensen developed the assembly line, and so that was very influential globally. That idea, and Woolard was also influenced by that idea, as was Taiichi Ohno and so forth. So what distinguished what Toyota did from what Henry Ford did was creating flow production all back through the supply chain. And of course, that took a long time. Internally, Toyota was doing flow production for not just assembly, but internal production that fed assembly. And then they were reaching out to suppliers to teach them TPS and the Kanban system, starting in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. So Woolard started thinking about this idea and putting it into practice of flow production when he worked at a company that made bus bodies in the 1917, 18 timeframe, something like that. And so everybody was touched by this idea of flow production, but Woolard had the ideas to apply it to the production of truck bodies, and then with Morris Motors, the production of engines, which were the pacing item in automobile production. All the other parts could be made relatively easily, but engines were the bottleneck in the production system, and Woolard applied flow production to engine production to avoid the bottleneck, much like Taiichi Ohno did as well.
Okay.
Ohno worked the engine shop before he had greater responsibilities.
Great. I have also a speculation.
Yep,
We did mention it in a previous conversation regarding the relationship between Mr. Morris and Mr. Ono, and compare that to the relationship between Mr. Ono and Mr. Toyota.
yep,
And when we think about teamwork, we're always thinking like about the operators and the supervisor, maybe a manager, but we're not thinking about that teamwork really upstairs
right.
at the managing and the ownership of the companies. And I think that did make a true difference also. What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
absolutely did, because Frank Woollard knew William Morris at the outset of William Morris starting his automotive business, and Woollard was a mechanical designer of complex parts for the automobile, which was the gearbox. And so they got to know each other very well and were on very friendly terms for, I don't know, what was it, probably 15 or 20, well, 20 years or so, something like that. And so, yes, it was instrumental. Same with Ono, because AG Toyota provided high cover. Basically, in a book I'm reading these days about the history of TPS, which is this one here, which you can see, um, uh, Taiichi Ono says, that AG Toyota and his other boss, last name is Saito, S-A-I-T-O, I forgot the first name, were basically just ignored all the complaints that Ono was generating from people. And apparently they shared a vision, and AG Toyota was a mechanical engineer, and I guess must have had conversations with Ono about flow production, what he was trying to do. And so, yes, he had high level support for many years, as did Frank Woollard. Unfortunately, Frank Woolard's support eroded over time. We can talk about that later. Um, uh,
Okay.
but that's definitely required. You need that support over a long period of time.
Yeah, and you bring me to a point. Let me show something I can quote from the book.
Yes,
Uh, are you seeing my
yes,
screen here? So there's this quote where Mr. Willett says, "The principles must be axiomatic. They must stand out as self-evident truths. The principle must be mandatory in tone. Each departure from the ideal is an index of inadequacy."
yep.
So you mentioned that Ono uh, had, well, everybody had his back,
Hmm.
Mr. Toyota in particular. and he was ignoring all the complaints. And I guess if you look at what Mr. Woollard says, he was saying something similar. This has to be done. So, and we did speak about this also in our previous meetings. And we mentioned this as a, well, I did. I don't know if you're in total agreement of that. This idea of transforming through continuous improvement is not really a democracy. It's more of an autocracy with your participation. If you want to participate, you can, but you must follow the rules. And there are rules. It's not it's become some, I think you said the word was romantic, like everybody does as they wish. What do you have to
Yeah.
say about that?
Yeah. The conversation last week was that there's the respect for people principle has been romanticized within lean world, but there is a certain amount of, here's what you have to do. And again, in this book about the history of TPS, there's, the subtitle is Taiichi Ohno's Battle, and that means him and Suzumura, and they were fighting people on a daily basis to get them to do things. And they talk a lot about persuasion and so forth, but then they follow it up by saying, but at some point that stops and you have to force people to do these things.
Yeah.
And then maybe then they will typically see the logic of it and it makes sense and so on. And both it's worth noting as well though that both Ono and Woollard recognize that with flow production that it helps make any problems immediately apparent as
Yeah.
well. So that there's that aspect of it as well that they both recognized.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to push people into this. And the respect for people in lean world has been so much romanticized that it's like it's no good to push people. You have to, persuade, persuade, persuade. Well, if you keep doing that, you're probably not going to get anywhere. You'll make some progress in some places and so on. We all know that. There's always the exceptions. But overall, you're not going to make much progress.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I have here the principles that Mr. Woolard
Mhm.
set for us, um, and I would like to share them with the
Sure.
audience because they're so revealing. Let me show them here. So, and I'm sorry, I'll have to read them. But remember, he said these were mandatory, and the basic principles were: first, you have to distinguish that mass production requires mass consumption, but flow production requires continuity of demand.
Mhm.
Second, the products of the system must be specialized and then standardized. The
Mhm.
products of the system must be simplified in general and in detail. And I guess all this comes down to standardization in our current terms. Um, all material supplies must conform to specification.
Yep.
All supplies must be delivered to strict timetable. The machines must be continually fed with sound material. Processing must be progressive and continuous. A time cycle must be set and maintained. I guess this was regarding takt time before
Mhm.
takt time was a thing.
Mhm.
Operations must be based on motion study and time study, like standard work. Accuracy of work must be strictly maintained. Long-term planning based on precise knowledge is essential. Here, in this point, let me stop here. I was because of my experience with when I was doing myself continuous improvement, and now that I'm doing it with clients, um, maybe I was missing this part, or it was not explicit. And I find trouble when I interact with people who really are not educated about what flow production is, or about the implications. And this we have forgotten to make people understand what flow production means, what it takes to make flow production work. Um, I think we're missing this. I
Mhm.
think we are excessively expecting like soft skills to get us all the way. Uh, I would like to, if you can take that comment and tell us what your opinion on this after I finish reading this.
Sure.
Maintenance must be by anticipation, never by default. It's incredible how in the 21st century I still find corrective maintenance being prevalent. It's
Hmm.
incredible.
Yep. Yep.
Every mechanical aid must be adopted for man and machine, and this would be like the precursor of Jidoka.
Hmm.
If you read the detail of the book, you'll find in each of these principles you will find the same elements of TPS. Every activity must be studied for the economic application of power, and information on cost must be promptly available. This is like the material and information flow analysis,
Hmm.
being the information flow analysis, the information of costs. Machines should be designed to suit the tasks they perform, and the system of production must benefit everyone, consumers, workers, and owners. And in this last one, if you read the detail, it's basically respect for people.
Right.
So, David, Bob, sorry, wouldn't you comment on these basic principles, and what would you have to say regarding my comment on the 12th issue?
Yep. Just an interesting point at the top, number one, about mass production demands mass consumption. It also depends upon mass sales as well. So what you have, one of the things that Ono noted in this book on the history at TPS was that mass production is not just, the only thing going on in terms of a system. There's a system for mass sale. There's a system for mass production. There's a system for mass distribution, et cetera. And all these systems must be challenged if you're going from push batch and queue push production to flow production. And so that's why you have to force people, because you're not just affecting the production world, but you're affecting the sales world, the distribution world, the dealership world, and so on. As far as long-term planning, well, we all know that varies from company to company what one would consider a long-term plan, and in some companies it's a 50-year plan, and in other companies it's a 2 or 3 year plan. A lot depends upon the tenure of the CEO. But based on precise knowledge. Now, regarding precise knowledge, one of the things that happens in Japan is that um, people from Toyota will go work in the government ministry, such as the Ministry of MITI, something Ministry of International Trade or whatever it is. And they'll go work there for a few years as analysts. And they will be reviewing, for example, Western literature focused, let's say, on automobile production or subsidiary components or materials necessary for automobile. And they will analyze this information and, send it back to headquarters in the form of government reports. And so precise knowledge is very important. I know when I worked in industry, in the aerospace industry, um, uh, at that time, which would have been throughout the 90s, that precise information on markets and market trends and what the competition was doing and so forth was not very good. I wouldn't call it precise knowledge. For example, when in my time in the supply chain management organization, the point of negotiation was price. It was never costs. And when the point of negotiation is price, that is imprecise information. Cost is precise information, but not price. And so, yeah, all of this stuff was lacking, but that's what's required for flow production.
Yeah. And he was very specific. He had like a list of uh, minimum knowledge that a person should have if he were to implement flow production. He was, of course, speaking about knowledge of the market,
Hmm.
and he was also speaking about knowledge of the process, knowledge of the machinery and equipment, knowledge of the product, knowledge of the materials. And I was thinking about the four M's that Mr. Ono at some point made famous, no? Material, method, manpower, and machine. And it
Yep.
was all right there. He was saying
Yeah.
if you're not uh, a sound, you don't have a profound knowledge of these four elements, in his own words, you're not going to be able to produce flow production. to make
Right.
the factory flow. So
Yeah.
he was
So
very he highlighted that very much.
yeah. Yeah, he developed the TPS-like system minus Kanban.
Hmm.
That was the main thing, which in the history of TPS, Ono was the had the ideas for Kanban and Andon. So yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting thing that happened, but unfortunately, it just got lost. If I can share a few slides with you to talk a bit about, show you a few things about Woollard
Yeah, go ahead.
and his viewpoint of things. Let's enlarge that. And if you look at this in blue here, it says the ideal arrangement for flow production should resemble a watershed. Let me enlarge it. Sorry. Uh, should resemble a watershed. The river fed by tributaries, supplied by streams, fed by brooks, flowing continuously forward to estuarine water and ultimately to the sea. And so, he had this similar idea that sort of went beyond what Henry Ford was doing and what Toyota did, which is to have a flow of all the parts and necessary materials to the point of assembly and then ultimately to the sea, which is the customer. The image on right is a painting by his daughter. His daughter was actually that's not the one by his daughter. It's a different one. But anyway, that's a painting of Woollard from 1952.
Yeah.
I just to give you a sense of the scope of the research here. This was the acknowledgments of everybody that was involved in this research in some form or another. And of course, Aubrey Silbertson was really the key uh, for um, in the book The Motor Industry for mentioning Woollard. Unfortunately, it was a very brief mention. Aubrey Silbertson was a big believer in batch and queue production, and that's the best way to go do it. He didn't really understand flow production. This is the famous Maxey Silbertson production cost curve. And what's interesting about it is when you present a graph like this in a book, people take it as fact. And this particular graph was very influential for AG Toyota. And the reason why Toyota plants were sized at 200,000 units, sized to produce 200,000 units. In other words, when they built a factory, it was sized for 200,000 units, was because of where the bend in the curve is just to the right, you see the annual volume. Well, it turns out that this curve was developed by Maxey and Silberson by interviewing various UK automotive production uh, people, executives, and this was not based on precise data. It was more of a sense of what cost versus volume looked like. But yet, when you present it this way, it seems very exact and taken for gospel. And actually, AG Toyota did take this for gospel. What's interesting is Soichiro Honda didn't take it for gospel, and when they sized their factories, it was for output of 50,000 units, expandable to larger volume if sales dictated. And so anyway, that's the book. As you can see, that was published in 1959. Um, and on page 56, all they said was flow production has many advantages over batch production, and they referenced Woollard. And that was it. You know, that was just the little tip off to Woolard's work. That's a picture I took of Professor Silbertson when I met him in 2009. So Woollard has interesting accomplishments that appear to be substantially different than Taiichi Ono, which is not to denigrate Ono. As I said, Ono was more a philosopher of a production system and apparently less of a mechanic, and Woollard was more of the mechanic and kind of less of the philosopher. So it's just approaching it from a different direction. Anyway, he was designing complicated automobile parts and engine design. Obviously, he's engaged in progressive industrial management, production system design, machine tool design with the automatic transfer machines, industrial automation. I mean, he really believed that the future of industrial automation was, man and machine. And he did write very clearly that machines must be in the service of man, not the other way around, which seems to be happening with AI and machines in general. And of course, one of the things that's hard to believe is that AG Toyota, Kichiro Toyota, Ono did not know about Woollard because the market in England was exactly the same as the market in Japan. It was high mix, low volume type of business, and it seems like they would have wanted to know what was going on elsewhere in the world in those kind of markets in terms of automotive production. So this is the time frame of Woolard's work at Morris Motors, and fits in between, of course, Henry Ford and Kiichiro Toyota's work. So it kind of shapes up like this, where you have, of course, Ford and Charles Sorensen, you see there, William Morris and Frank Woollard, and then Eiji Toyota and Taiichi Ono.
Hmm.
And for some reason, it's all missed. Woollard received a MBE medal, member of the British Empire medal from Winston Churchill for overcoming gearbox problems in tanks in World War I. So as you can imagine, this is a very complicated design. Let's see, let's get rid of that phone call. Um, Birmingham, Coventry. This shows you the location of where the engines and gearboxes and so forth were produced, and then the Oxford Cowley region where there was automobile assembly and auto bodies and radiators and so on. And what's interesting, of course, about the Birmingham, Coventry region is this is getting nearer where the famous Platt agreement with that Kiichiro Toyota had for looms with the Platt company. And at that time, of course, um, the Morris Motors was an open shop, meaning you could just knock on the door and go in and have a visit to see what they're doing both in the Birmingham, Coventry region and the Oxford Cowley region. And so Kiichiro Toyota and his colleagues were spending, weeks in the UK. It's hard to believe that they didn't visit. This is what the vehicles look like. They had a 34% market share in 1930, so they were the major automaker in the UK. They would have been kind of like the General Motors of the UK or the Ford of the UK. Really worth visiting. The engine volume production at Morris Motors looked like that uh, uh, in the first few years, and you can see the Toyota engine volumes in comparison over the years that Taiichi Ono was in charge of the engine production.
So
So
we can safely say that flow production did for Morris Engine what it did for Toyota, but in a couple of years.
you're
Uh,
right.
they were really successful, and so if you project that, it's quite a sad story that Morris Motors eventually got acquired by another company.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a moment. But the short story there is that, of course, there's a lot of competition in Europe in automobiles, even back then, and so the British automotive industry started to dry up because in the 1950s they were still using parts that were designed in the 1920s and 30s, and so they just didn't have the durability or quality to compete with newer things. So yeah, Woolard accomplished in a couple of years what took Toyota longer to do. They had things like operators, time charts. You can see at the bottom left, a warning light of handling time, walking time, cutting time. Kind of looks similar to a standard work combination sheet. They had another type of timing chart here, which is loading and unloading,
Would this
approach
be
of the.
like the famous I forgot the name of this chart, the Yamasumi chart? Is this more or less
Yeah,
like
kind
that?
of like a Umazumi. Yeah, this is 1925, by the way. The previous slide was also Frank Woollard authored a series of paper with William Morris, but I'm sure Frank Woollard was the main writer in all of this. But these were a series of papers, detailed papers on how they did their production, because they wanted to share it with the world, because they thought flow production was important for national economic growth, and there was all this waste in traditional manufacturing. And this was 1925 when they published these series of articles in a journal called Machinery, which, by the way, was very difficult to find. But I was fortunate at the time I was doing the research. Libraries were getting rid of their bound volumes of conference proceedings and technical journals. And so I was able to locate these things in the used book market and then get multiple copies of these things. I'd buy 4 or 5 copies if I could get them because I wanted to scan them and include them in this book and in the reprint edition of Woolard's book. And a lot of times these copies were marked, and I wanted clean copies, no markings in them, and so on. And so anyway, this is 1925. Yeah. This is their supermarket for engine blocks. There was an elevator, loaded them up at the top, and they spiraled down into an automatic transfer machine. And they had trouble with the automatic transfer machines. That didn't always work out right, so they ended up pushing the parts along, which you can see in the picture on the right and behind the spiral conveyor.
Yeah, now that you show these, it comes to my mind, for instance, he was very specific, writing about using gravity to transfer material from one place to another,
Yeah,
more or less in the karakuri sense.
yeah,
And he was very specific about avoiding overproduction and inventory through conveyor belts. And I mean, he was very, very on spot in all these concepts that eventually have come to be part of a basic part of continuous
yep,
improvement.
yep, yep. That is indeed the case. There was a 4-day supply of engine blocks. This is a transmission, a U-shaped transmission assembly line. Oops, and that's just a sampling of
You,
of a
you,
presentation that's over 125 slides. Uh, but
you mentioned the
but
U-shaped cell, and he's very
yeah,
specific about that. He almost tells in a part of his book that it's basically a very efficient way of organizing work, and that was also shocking to me. I thought the U cell was a an invention that was further down the line in time.
right. And it was not. It was earlier in time. But what I think it goes to show you is that when people think of this concept of flow production and try to reduce it to practice, what you're going to find is, there's the obvious thing in business: inventory takes money, inventory ties up cash. If you can find a way to produce in a way that doesn't require all this inventory, then you would stumble upon the idea of flow production. And then you'd stumble upon all kinds of ideas like U-shaped cells and on lights, supermarket system, the precise timing that Woollard talked about, and so forth. And so I think these ideas are probably, common among people who would have these ideas, and probably happened in a lot of smaller shops that we don't even know about, that whose work could have been published in obscure trade magazines, 100 years ago, but we don't know about it.
Yeah,
Um,
he
so
does
so
mention some in his book, Bob, and that was also another interesting fact. He was in the book referring to some companies in the States, other companies in England, not always in the automotive industry, and he said, "Well, flow production is not even new." So he was basically putting in writing something that, as you say, perhaps was existing at the day.
mhm, yep. And so you can see here in the 1920s, this was from the Proceedings of the Institution of Production Engineers, 1922, 23 time frame of the hand transfer machines that they developed. And this was, complex machinery. There's engine blocks going around, cylinder blocks, I should say, going around a hand transfer machine to bore out the cylinder blocks. The first automatic transfer machines you can see on the image on the left and the right here, first and second automatic transfer machines. I forgot oh yeah, the name of the company that Woollard worked with was William Asquith Limited. And these, as you can imagine, were very expensive machinery at the time. And William Morris, of course, was a very wealthy man, and foot the bill for the expense associated with producing these machines. But Woollard was a mechanical designer and had a heavy hand in development of these machines. They, of course, became much more popular later in time, and you can see here at an image from JTech, the Toyota subsidiary of automatic transfer machines. This was the old Morris Engine branch in Coventry, and this is on the right-hand side. The building has been repurposed as to the Coventry University School of Business. So I visited all these places and so forth. These were the image on the left is what's reproduced in the 55th anniversary special reprint edition of Woolard's book, and the paper on the right was included in that. So, it was very interesting work. Woollard had patents. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Patents on transfer machines and so forth with Herbert Taylor. Um, he ended up resigning from Morris Motors in a manner that he didn't understand, and we couldn't find. Peter Seymour and I couldn't figure out exactly what happened. But it turned out that in some other book that was published more recently, um, that he was a diabetic, and after lunch he would snooze, and apparently William Morris caught wind of that and fired him.
Yeah.
And Woollard said it was like a bolt out of the blue. It was his exact quote. Um, and anyway, he went on to be sit on the board of other companies. I mean, he wasn't destitute, and William Morris gave him a parting gift of something like 60,000 pounds, or 30,000 or 60,000, I forget which. Was a huge amount of money back then. Anyway, I think this is an interesting quote here from Woollard. When one sees a flow line layout, it is only natural to exclaim, "Well, how else would you do it?" It's a tribute to the logic of the method. And it is true, when people see it, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. But when they don't see it, batch and queue push production makes sense. It's a
Yeah.
very strange phenomenon that people have a hard time imagining flow. But yet it's a very simple thing. I mean, I can recount to you many times when I was in industry where to get something done, you had to walk it through, such as a long-term agreement with a supplier. Um, it was a bureaucratic organization at the time, required 10 signatures. And if you wanted to get the contract signed, you literally walked it through. You went to each executive's office to get it signed. And so when you need something quickly, you walk it through, because and you get all the signatures in, let's say, a day or two. But if you send it through the internal mail, it goes to one executive, it sits on their desk for 2 weeks, it goes to another executive, sits on their desk for a month, et cetera. If you pull the signatures, you get it quickly. If you push the signatures, it takes forever. And so we have those experiences, such as walking through the contract and to expedite things, but we don't do that in normal times. In normal times, we just sit around and wait, and we associate walking it through as a rush, and you don't want to be rushing all the time to do work because you'll get burnt out if you're rushing. But you're really not rushing. You're walking casually from one executive office to another, and you're not running. Uh, and then you're in the executive building, and you go to their cafeteria, and the food's better. So anyway, you have a nice time. So Woollard this was an interesting paper. Look at the title on the left. Continuous production is the answer to economic distress. This was the same situation. This was, post World War II period that I think Woollard was writing this. Is that correct? Yeah, 1947. And same with Ono. The idea is we help not just the company, but we help the country recover by developing a unique, Japanese production system and so forth. Same ideas.
Same idea.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, same ideas. This is David Bramley, whom I interviewed. He was 96, 2010, found out some details about Woollard and so forth. Um, Woollard taught basic principles of flow production in what's now called Aston University Business School. Those lectures were recorded. I tried to get them, but they were on a type of a media that would spontaneously combust, and so they no longer exist. They were destroyed to avoid catching fire. So those lectures were lost, which would have been very interesting to hear. As you noted, the basic principles. I think flow is the common denominator that drives everybody to the same principles and practices. It's the point of convergence. You're going to think of JIT, you're going to think of supermarkets, you're going to think of automation, you're going to think of quick changeover.
Yep,
This is just what's going to happen.
it's gonna
Uh,
happen. I have here, if sorry to interrupt you here. You know, before I read the book, I was badly, I guess, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I was badly interpreting what you said, what you mentioned as progressive management. If you let me show a slide here,
sure. Yeah. Let me stop this.
and
Yeah.
let me tell you and the people, the friends here, uh, this is when I got, I guess, the correct idea of what you mean when you refer to progressive management, because I was being political about it.
Yeah. It's not that.
And so here's what he defines. Sorry, this is not it. This one here. So for Woollard, progressive management, I guess, was flow production because he said, and this is my bad interpretation is because I was being ideological, because it's our current world. We're so
Right.
ideologized. Um, and he said the work is virtually self-progressive. Flow production envisages the passage of the part from operation to operation in a direct and uninterrupted sequence. And that is what he meant as work being progressive.
Mhm.
And am I correct interpreting you here?
Yes. I'm always using progressive management in a non-political context.
Okay, that's
Yeah. Progressive means it's something different than the status quo.
yeah.
You're progressing in your management thinking and practice as opposed to being static or regressing as some companies do, like it happened at Wire Mold. They were progressively changing how they lead and manage the organization, and then they got bought out, and they were regressed back to push production, batch and queue production.
Okay. Yeah, because Willard was saying to progress in production is to see the product starting to appear through the production line, no? It's not
Right,
like you're putting a lot of stock everywhere and then you're pulling it from your inventories. No, you're gonna see the product starting to appear. That's why it's progressing. And that was really a revelation to me to understand the concept of progressive production. Okay.
yes.
Um, I have another quote here, which I found interesting. Maybe you can comment on this one. Um, he says the great advantage gained by the adoption of flow production lies in the fact that it focuses the light on these deviations from principle and thus definitely assists in raising the efficiency ratio nearer to the impossible goal of parity. That is 100% that we shall never attain. So, this is the idea of uh, seeking perfection, although we know you're not going to achieve it ever, but you seek it. And so I said, okay, here's the definition you sometimes read in the lean community.
Yep,
No? Follow perfection. And it's always the pushback you get, or many times from clients who say, why would you do that? It's impossible.
right.
So from the 1920s, we have been blind to this concept. What would you say about that one?
Yeah, I mean, we're still battling the same old preconceptions that have long existed. That's why I keep telling people focusing on beliefs is wrong. You need to go back deeper to people's preconceptions to change their preconceptions because if you if you have a leader who believes in theory X, people are lazy and so forth, and you push them towards empowering people, if you haven't changed a preconception, they'll always drift back towards thinking people are lazy and won't do the work. So in this realm of flow production, you've got to force people into a different set of preconceptions in order to make this work. You persuade, 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 but when that ends, or when that you've come to the limit of the effectiveness of persuasion, then it's time to force people, say this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah. And that's part of our job, I guess. Most of the people who are here with us, I guess we face the same issues. I guess we have to do as you just said. We have to strive to convince people to understand this and put the effort, and you have to make people just do it. You
Yeah.
cannot have the luxury of not doing it,
Yep.
especially today with AI technology and all these other aspects of production that are appearing. I guess these basic concepts are we're going to be more blind to them now. What do you think about that?
Yeah, likely. That will likely be the case unless AI says, hey, this way you've been doing it is really stupid. You need to do flow production. But people might see that as a hallucination in AI and say, forget about that, you know. But these ways of thinking, these preconceptions, these systems are long-lived, you know. I mean, there is a history of flow production at the Venice, I think it's the Venice Arsenal, and how they made boats in Venice back in the 1500s and so forth. But these things tend to be fleeting. It doesn't end up being, World War II, you made munitions in a flow production way because you needed, aircraft and bullets and so forth quickly. You couldn't, batch production was no good. So, but then the war ends and it's back to batch production. One of the things I think is, I mean, I'm a huge believer in the fact that the Toyota people must have been very strong students of what other people were doing, not just Henry Ford. There is no smoking gun that Woollard influenced AG Toyota, or excuse me, Kichiro Toyota, Ono AG Toyota, Mr. Saito, etc. But it would not have been expensive for back then for the Toyota companies to hire somebody to translate technical journals or articles to English. Excuse me, to Japanese, English to Japanese. And I got to believe that they did that sort of thing because um, obviously they Toyota people use their own ingenuity and creativity and so forth, and they did that marvelously, and they deserve all the credit that they've earned for doing that. But when you're undertaking going from a loom business to a automotive business, it seems to me that you'd want to learn something about what other people are doing. And especially as it relates to your market. So if I can share with you a few slides here, did Woollard influence? Oh no, again, there's no smoking gun, but there's a heck of a lot of circumstantial evidence. Kichiro Toyota was a degreed mechanical engineer, and his experience was design and new product development. He had about 3 years of operating experience in batch and queue production of looms. They manufactured about 4,000 looms a year. Um, they toured U.S. automakers in the fall of '29, and then they visited Oldham, UK. You can see in the image there where Oldham is in 1929 to sign the patent and license agreement with Platt Brothers. And it's not a large distance south, and there was, of course, a vast rail network there to get to um, uh, Cowley and Oxford. And they had specific interest in visiting machine tool makers. I mean, this is documented, specific interest visiting machine tool makers, auto parts suppliers, and automakers. And those visits were secret because at the time, there was no, it was the dream of automaking was in Kichiro Toyota's head. The Automatic Loom Works company had not yet created Toyota Motor Corporation. So those particular visits I'm not sure Kichiro Toyota would have understood the significance of flow production at the time. Woollard said it makes sense when you see it, but his background was design and a few years of production supervision of batch production. Kichiro Toyota begins automotive research in 1933. Toyota Automatic Loom Works produces, that's precursor to Toyota Motor Corporation. They're using batch and queue production method. The history of TPS says, Ono says, yeah, if I didn't, um, I don't know, I forgot how we worded it. If I didn't know something or think about flow production, I would have just copied the Americans' batch production method. Um, Toyota, of course, when it started, had to rely on suppliers because they didn't have the money for vertical integration like Henry Ford, just like Morris Motors. Kichiro decided to introduce flow production system at the new Koromo plant. Why? As any business person would know, inventory ties up cash. How can we figure out a way not to tie up all that cash? If we tie up too much cash, we're not profitable. The company dies. So, it's obvious, right? Kichiro Toyota wrote a 750-page training manual explaining flow production, but strangely, that document no longer exists. I'm wondering if it's a translation of Colvin's American Machinist articles or Woolard's machinery papers. The Colvin's papers would have been about Henry Ford's production system, and the machinery papers would have been about the Woolard Morris production system. Anyway, World War II comes along, disrupts just in time. Toyota produced 101,000 vehicles in 1959, 30% of which were cars. So key question. Did Kichiro Toyota read Woolard's papers that which described most of the early vision for flow production? Was it Henry Ford? What did he learn in his visits to the UK, automakers, machine tool makers, and so on? Which UK auto companies did he visit? Had to be Morris because they were the biggest one there. Most market share, similar market, high mix, low volume. Did Kichiro Toyota really conceive of just in time by missing a train? As I like to, as a scientist engineer by training, I like to question these origin stories and so on, supermarkets and whatnot. There was a 7-year lag between the US UK visit and the decision to adopt flow production. Why did that occur? Let's see here. Yeah, did Ono really learn about supermarkets on his visit? What sparked Toyota's interest in automatic transfer machines post 1950? Was it Woolard's work? Was it Germans who adopted that, or US automakers? So what I find interesting is mechanical engineers are not trained in production. It's not the discipline of mechanical engineering. I know I was a mechanical engineer undergraduate. We're not trained in production stuff. The key information was widely available, and we know that Toyota managers are very good at information gathering and record keeping. We know that for sure. At the time, the US, UK, Germany, France, and to some extent Russia were the places where industry was highly developed, so you're going to keep a close eye on those places. Toyota managers admired doers, not theoreticians. That's one of the reasons why they were so fond of referring to Henry Ford, because he was, self-made man, trial and error engineer, and so forth, not theoretician. Same like Woolard and Morris Motors. The emphasis at startup was on copying designs, copying production methods, copying. Of course, in lean world, it's a sin to copy. Don't ever copy. I say copy intelligently, but copy. The Morris engine plant, as I said, was open for public tours. Same market. The other thing too is the scale of Morris Motors was much more relevant to Toyota than Ford. I mean, Ford was producing, hundreds of, and think about this in the late 1920s, early 1930s. Ford's production volume was huge. I don't know what it is, 1 million cars a year, 500,000, whatever it was. It was huge. And here's Toyota producing, 50 cars, 50 trucks, whatever it was. Who would you be more inclined to want to learn from? Somebody closer to your own situation seems to be most likely. So anyway, we'll stop there. Let's take some questions. Or Alfredo, what do you have to say about
No,
some of this?
no, I guess I'll just wrap it up here with a couple of slides too. Just this is my reflections. I put in blue what I
Hmm.
think is the relationship between what Woolard wrote and what I gather as TPS or Toyota Way. For
Hmm.
instance, he has some mentions of what I recall as tack time and pull of uh, mixed products as med. Muda, he's trying to reduce overproduction here. He has a mention on Jidoka, on reducing weighting. He has a mention on 5S, again, SMED, and reducing Muda on standards. Um, and he has here this was interesting because I see so much back and forth on regarding OEE,
Hmm.
and he let me finish with this one. He said sometimes, in the interest of total efficiency, it may be found profitable to install in the line machines which will be occupied for quite brief periods. It is, however, not individual machine tool efficiency, but the overall utilization of man hours that give the desired results. So he's in favor of maximizing the system and not individual parts of the system. So, and I can go on. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
it's an endless supply of TPS-like thinking in the Woolard book.
yeah.
So yes, thank you, Bob,
I think
for
if I could just say, I think one of
yeah,
the reasons why, Woolard was forgotten and people have this fascination with TPS and Toyota and so forth is, um, I think the philosophy associated with TPS is something that people, grasp and capture and take to heart in a way that's a little bit more difficult to do with Woolard, even though the elements are there. But just the depth of Toyota's philosophy and the relation of that philosophy to the Japanese way of thinking and so on has so much depth to it.
yeah,
And that's different from the Western way of thinking. So for a Westerner, I think the Ono philosophy is much richer, more interesting because it's unfamiliar to them.
yeah.
And this accounts for some of the reasons why um, Woolard and Morris Motors were forgotten and why we don't talk about them today.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your investigation. Thank you for writing your books and for
Does
your
anybody have any
generosity.
questions?
Yeah, we have half an hour for people to interact with you. So please, to the audience, be our guests. Ian, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Hi, Ian.
Right. Thanks, guys. Afternoon for me. Uh, why you gave great examples of how traditional practices are rarely as poor as is often seems to be claimed today. And I know examples from other fields where if you look back far enough, you see examples that are very close to what today are claimed to be, initiatives and best practice.
Hmm.
Uh, why do you think each generation seems to need to learn many of the same lessons that have been learned before? What stops society and humans progressing in a nice linear continuous improvement curve? We seem to be going round in circles,
Yes.
often rebranding the same things and calling them something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Because the past is ever present. The the way we think is built up over time. It's seven, I think it's 15 generations to Henry VIII and 177 generations to ancient Egypt. So
Mm.
it's not that long ago generationally, and we think just like the Pharaoh did and so on. And we have this network of economic, social, political, historical, technological, spiritual, legal, business, uh, and a few more preconceptions. Those are categorically the preconceptions that I mentioned: economic, social, political, so forth. Within each category, there's 10 or 15 preconceptions, and those things are just overwhelmingly difficult to move. So it's not just changing the production system; it's changing the purchasing system, the sales system, the micro economic system of the company, and how it interacts with the macro economy and parties outside of that. Because the suppliers you're dealing with might still be batch and queue producers, and they won't change, but you still got to do business with them for some reason or another. So it's like a gravity. These preconceptions, this network of preconceptions is like gravity and just pulls us back into, the way we've always done it.
And why do some fields seem to have that gravity pulling us back? But other
Except in
fields, if anyone here plays golf, nobody uses woods that are made out of wood and balls that are handmade from bird's feathers or whatever they used to be.
Yeah.
And we all turn our television channels over by pressing a button that's on the arm of the chair and not walking up to it like I remember. So
right.
So some changes seem to have no issue and pullback.
And these are the technological preconceptions that says technology is always good.
Okay, yeah.
And people don't question it. That even if it's bad at the moment, like our ERP system is a mess, or AI is messing everything up at the Salesforce.com company, it's a temporary glitch because technology is always good. So we use titanium, huge head drivers and so on and there's also a social component to it. This golfer's using it who's on the pro circuit, and I want to hit the ball as long and hard as them, and so I'm going to use it too. And so there's a huge social pressure to conform to ways of doing things, whether it's technological advancement or technological retardation.
And I suppose,
meaning backwardness is what I mean.
And I suppose in the examples I mentioned, you can no longer get the old stuff, whereas in manufacturing you can certainly get people who will choose to manage in a batch and produce way, or
and then Ono's the hardest time Ono had was with economists, and they accountants, and they just wouldn't. They would always say flow production is more expensive.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't or wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't understand right size machine. Instead of buying the $1 million machine, you home build one for $8,000. Well, when the parts pass across that machine, it's a lot cheaper than passing across the $1 million machine, but they couldn't get it.
Yes, as Goldratt said, what was his paper called? Cost accounting, enemy number one of production.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Ian. Anybody else? We would love to hear about your ideas, your thoughts. A couple of guys are writing. Maybe you can.
Oh, there's some comments. Oh, yeah. What do we got here? Okay.
Dave.
Hi, Alfredo. Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for putting this together and all the work you put into
hi,
it.
David.
Hi, Bob. I'd kind of quickly like to revisit a comment Bob made about 15 minutes ago. I think Alfredo, you kicked it off. It was a quote, when you see a flow line, it's only natural. There's no other way to see it. And then Bob, you commented that some manufacturers, have the pushback about changing the flow, even though they've seen it at work and succeeding in another environment that they've just walked into and visited. As you know, I run a lot of benchmarking tours here to Japan, and we get manufacturers from all over the world that come in and go, "Oh, that's so simple." But when they go back home and we keep in contact with them, trying to help them out over 6 months, a year, 2 years, they're always coming up for excuses for why they can't do it, although they're creating the same or similar or simpler product with similar processes, similar people, same skill sets, but their facility is different for some reason. And there's an excuse book that's that thick based on why they can't do it. What is it? What's the fear to change? What explains that? I mean, I don't really know why what the mechanisms are in an organization as big as some of these companies that prevent the change from happening when they've seen the success it brings. Any
Well, I mean,
experience?
one thing this book about the history of TPS makes clear is that without somebody like Ono, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
there was persuasion, but force.
Was it
So
the bean counters then? Are we going to blame the accountants or
no,
who?
no, I think that people are afraid of being blamed for something not working
Right.
at
True.
all levels.
Hmm.
And this goes back to probably, our childhood with our parents. We didn't actually do it. The other kid did it, but I got blamed. And or in school, or whatever, or in our first employers where we had a boss that just blamed people for problems all the time.
Right.
And so we're unwilling to do things differently.
Hmm.
I have a theory here, and
Yeah.
please correct me, all of you guys. I think when you see a flow production line, and perhaps you can eventually say, yeah, that's the way to do it. And as Dave said, and I was part of a recent tour. Thank you, David, for that to Japan. And perhaps the expectations I had was maybe I'll see something I've never seen, but it's not that what happens. And in fact, you conclude, okay, this is easy to do, and then you come back home and you don't do it. So I think it's like going to the gym. It's hard. I mean, it's easy to understand. I cannot read another book of how to be more healthy and thinner. I cannot, and I cannot go to another seminar where they will tell me, you have to have a better habits. But then I go home and I eat my burger with my Coke. So what is it with us? You know what to do, but then you don't do it.
Right.
Well, for my own career in industry, I focused on doing what's right, and I didn't worry about consequences. Maybe I was stupid. I got in trouble for that many times. But I just had the attitude of, this is we're embedded in a really stupid system, and it's made to be really complex. And there's a relatively clear avenue of doing what is right means, or doing what's right. There's a relatively clear avenue for that, but it's certainly different than the way everybody else would do it. And personally, I just didn't worry about that. Maybe it's a naivete, or maybe it's just my personality that says, we just have to do the right thing here and not worry about the consequences. And I think a lot of people are really concerned about consequences.
Yep. I think that's it. I think you nailed it. Sure. Thank you, guys.
Okay, we have Stephen here.
Yeah, hi, Steve.
Yeah. I just are any people on this seminar familiar with David Hutchins? You probably will be, Bob, yeah?
Yes, the name's familiar, but
Yeah,
it goes back a little ways.
David did a lot of work in Japan and did a lot of work with people like he knew personally Ishikawa. He bumped into the people like Duran a lot. He writes a lot of books on basically on Japanese methodology, why it works better, blah blah blah. And since I think he says somewhere like about the 1990s there was a depression, and then like the whole wind went out of the continuous improvement sales, as it not sales but in terms of make you go along. And my comment is that David really seems difficult for him to get any traction in this country, and it's a continuous frustration to me that when
Hmm.
there are so many people, I'd say in a very sound area. And so the sort of question I would like to ask is if you have specifically tried to interact with at levels of like the UK government, what frustrations have you found?
Oh, I have not. No, no.
Okay.
No, I'm generally persona non grata in Lean World and other worlds, and so no, none of the big shots interact
Okay.
David.
because because I do stuff without concern of consequence.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
And so I mean my interest is to understand what's going on, and I just tell it like it is, and that apparently offends a lot of people, and so what do I don't care. It doesn't, none of this, I don't do what I do for income. I don't need the income. I don't depend upon any of this for anything in my life. Zero. I'm just trying to understand what's going on, why things are happening. I'm just an investigator
Okay.
investigating.
Mhm.
David.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Stephen, I mean, thank you for bringing up David Hutchins. He's done some amazing work, and I
Yeah.
kind of overlap a little bit in the fact that we've got shared, I've got 3 decades here in Japan, and basically everything I know about management or production comes from Japanese methodologies, particularly TPS. But the pushback that I get from governments or agencies, I think they're pretty similar to what Mr. Hutchins feels and gets all the time. Um, we don't need any more of that Japanese stuff. And I get it. I don't like people trying to ram new Japanese words down throats. I never do that. I don't agree with it because it just becomes alien to people. There's lots of good ways to say what the Japanese say using English words that people already know without force. But sometimes there's a little bit lost in translation. And I think that's what happens. A lot of agencies, maybe manufacturing associations, companies, manufacturers, they've got a little bit of a, and I'm not going to say it's biased, it's not like in the racist sense, but in a, well, we're just as good at manufacturers as the Japanese, we get it in Germany sometimes, we get it in the US all the time, and I'm on 10 or 15 online calls every week, and that comes up in half of them. Well, we don't have anything to learn from the Japanese anymore. Their day is over.
Well, I
You know,
think that says it all, David. If somebody were to say to me, I don't want to learn anything about, Japanese stuff, too much of that stuff, it's like clearly you don't want to learn. I mean, I think you got to throw it back. I would throw it back in their face if you obviously have no interest in learning. You don't care. I remember, I used to have a slide that says that I would show to my students and show in my lean leadership training. And I did this in Germany. And I said, and it said something like, just because you have a degree and graduated with an A plus average doesn't mean you know anything. And of course, the Germans were highly offended by that. But it's true. I mean, the advanced degree is only reflects so much of what you know, and any given field has a lot more to it than what you know. And so to think that, you're hair doctor, or whatever you are, not to pick on the Germans, and I'm Dr. Emiliani, whatever, it only means so much, what is it? Sakichi Toyota said, open the window. There's a whole world out there, right? Well, there is.
What,
And
what,
so
what
you
would you
have to
say? I
be open to
remember.
learning all the time, not just, in your field and think you know it all. So some
Bob,
people got offended by that.
I remember sometime you may have said something like this, um, or I read it somewhere. You described the American way of managing is very financial, whereas the German way of doing business is very technical, like engineer oriented. And then the Japanese way of doing things is very teamwork oriented. And so, is there something there that makes communication impossible? I mean, it's basically a way of upbringing that makes people unaware of what they can take from the other way of doing things.
Well, there's two things. People approach a problem with from their own perspective, which means their own preconceptions and biases and so forth. And so, a production problem looks different to a manufacturing engineer than it does look to an accountant and so on. And so not everybody's on the same page. But the other thing is, as far as classical and neoclassical economics and neoliberalism have proved to be very popular globally. The point of intersection between classical management and progressive management really is corporate finance, but otherwise they're completely different. So, it's not so much that I mean, there's things going on that the U.S. is leading on, which is not so good, called financialization of supply chain finance and other nonsense like that. But, the whole thing there is it's a way to get wealthy quickly, and more important than wealth is to gain status. So human being has a finite lifetime, and so you want to gain status and wealth sooner rather than later. And so these are different tricks to be able to go do that. And it
Yes.
happens globally. It's not just a US phenomenon.
Yeah.
But
So,
but some leaders, there's some consistency in some companies where the corporate purpose transcends making money, doing things. You obviously have to be profitable, but doing things for society and so forth, and being here for the long term, 500 years, not 6 years and flip to a seller, to a private equity or something like that.
Yeah.
yeah. And
Long
it,
term, short term is a big part of it too, I think.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
length.
but we all know, of course, within a long-term perspective, there's short-term thinking that has to happen. There's medium-term thinking that has to happen. I mean, I always get really annoyed when people say, it's because of U.S. short-term thinking. Well, you're in business. Tomorrow's different than today. You're going to have to adjust to tomorrow's reality. Maybe your competitor announces they got bought. Now they're much bigger than you. You got to adjust to it.
yeah, but I mean,
So
I think that kind of thinking makes you push the wrong buttons, because if you're financially oriented, it's different to be oriented towards a good process and doing good stuff that eventually, even in the short term, will be financially viable. But it's an outcome, and it's not the focus of your work. So I guess it's part of the problem. It's a miscommunication uh, situation there. And on the other hand, I would like to recall what Woollard said. It's the ignorance of the process, because at least in my experience, I don't know any other places in the world how this goes, but I see most CEOs, non-process erudites. They don't know anything about the process they manage.
right.
So it's very hard. They're financially oriented and process ignorant. So it's
That's why
basically it's a recipe for failure.
Chihiro Nakao says you have to put their face in it, face in the mess that's going on in the process. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult situation. I mean, that's why Genba Kaizen is so important, but it's hard to get the leaders to go to Genba Kaizen. Once they put their face in it, they can see what the problems are with the metrics, with the process, with the people. And the problem with the people is not the people, but the directions from above and so forth.
Okay.
I do recall, though, by the way, Akio Toyota getting interviewed recently, and this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where whoever was interviewing him said, "What about making this or that kind of product?" And he said, "I don't think we can make a profit doing that." And that's when he was, I guess he was chairman at the time. But I mean, that's part of a business reality. Some of your business decision on what to make or not make depends upon the profit. I mean, a Lexus is 3-month, 4-month wait here. Toyota doesn't overproduce Lexus. Why? To maintain pricing. Why? To maintain profitability. Why? Well, on and on you go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a tangible, real part of economics here that has to be satisfied.
Yeah. Well, I have a story here, maybe to wrap it up.
Okay.
There's this guy, rest in peace, who owned a very important company here. About 15 years ago, he was the owner. He was third generation. He was the biggest shareholder. He was CEO at the time, and eventually he made a decision. He did not study engineering. He decided to go study at the Gemba. So he built his little room on the third floor in the factory. And every day he went very early to the Gemba and started working with bolts and nuts. And he knew his factory. You could not tell him anything he didn't know about the factory. And it grew, it grew, it grew. And eventually he, as a CEO, decided he would not be the CEO. So he hired a CEO and became the head of product development because he knew the technical stuff. And that was when the company grew. That was when he basically took over the market. And to me, that was very inspiring. He was not interested in the financial aspect of the company as CEOs usually are. He knew that if he made a very, very good effort and put the hard work in the development of the product and the process, the financials would come, and they did.
Yeah. So it's a way of saying he didn't care about the consequences of his work.
Yeah.
Because he had confidence that the results would come.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
I like that. Yeah, you're welcome. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Woollard was a very interesting guy. You know, the span of his capabilities is remarkable.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. Thank you, Bob, for your investigation and the work you've put all these years writing and keeping us interested and inspired and documented. And everybody, thank you for attending. See you
You're welcome.
in the next one.
Thanks for the nice comments, Stephen.
Thanks, Bob.
Yes.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Alfredo. Cheers. Nice to
Bye-bye.
meet you. Bye now.